The Browns' decision to start Dillon Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders didn't just stir up the fan base. It exposed cracks inside the locker room. Players didn't argue, but the mood shifted. Garrett, the team's defensive anchor, didn't disguise his discomfort with the move. As someone who has seen seasons rise and fall on bad calls from above, his quiet frustration reflected a deeper sentiment. The team had overlooked what was happening on the field. Sanders had been proving himself steadily in practice. Yet it was Gabriel who got the nod, a choice that didn't sit well with everyone.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
The video frames this as a moment of growing disconnection between management and the locker room. Garrett's composed but unmistakable reaction served as a signal that the team's veterans were watching and judging the front office's decisions. The call to bench Sanders wasn't just about who started a game. It was about what kind of standard the Browns wanted to set, and whether leadership was still grounded in merit or simply in message control. There's been tension in Cleveland before, but nothing quite like this. Because this time, the tension wasn't built on losing streaks or failed signings. It wasn't about another coach being shown the door or a GM getting axed mid-season. This time, the tension came from within, deep within the locker room. And at the center of it all stood two quarterbacks, one franchise-altering decision, and a silent storm named Myles Garrett. When the Cleveland Browns made the decision to start Dillon Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders, they didn't just disrupt a depth chart, they fractured trust. Quietly, discreetly, with barely a public explanation, they chose Gabriel. And in doing so, they set off a ripple effect that exposed every underlying issue the organization has tried to keep buried. Inside the building, the reaction was instant, not loud, not chaotic, but heavy. Players avoided eye contact. Coaches tightened up. The energy shifted. And Garrett, always composed, always collected, said nothing. But you didn't need words to understand what he was thinking. You could see it in the way he sat through meetings, arms crossed. You could hear it in the silence after the announcement. Garrett wasn't just surprised. He was fed up. This wasn't just about Sanders being benched. This was about what the decision represented. A young quarterback who had shown maturity, leadership, and consistent growth was being passed over. Not because of anything he lacked, but because of decisions being made far above him. Decisions rooted not in performance, but in something else entirely. And Garrett had seen enough of that in his time with the Browns. He's been through seasons where talent got buried under poor planning, where leadership felt disconnected from the players who were putting everything on the line every Sunday, where momentum was killed not by opponents, but by the organization itself. And now, it was happening again. Sanders, by all accounts, had earned his shot. He showed up early. He led by example. He stayed composed when the spotlight faded. Teammates respected him. Coaches praised his preparation. But when it came time to make a decision, Cleveland went with Gabriel. The locker room felt it. Garrett felt it. There was no public meltdown. No fiery post-game rant. Just calculated silence. And in that silence, a message was sent. This isn't how you build a winning culture. What followed was weeks of unease. The locker room split not in open conflict, but in vibe. Players didn't trust the process. The energy was cautious. Gabriel, despite his efforts, couldn't connect the way Sanders had. And the results on the field reflected it. Missed opportunities. Confused schemes. A team that looked flat. Because at its core it was... All the while, Garrett continued his quiet protest. A slow clap in the film room. A look exchanged after a failed drive. A cryptic Instagram post that didn't mention names but said everything it needed to say. Garrett wasn't trying to stir chaos. He was demanding accountability. Leadership doesn't always have to yell. Sometimes, it just has to stop pretending everything's okay. And while the franchise tried to keep the optics clean, the truth was unraveling. Garrett wasn't alone in his frustration. Veterans began speaking up privately. Younger players started to question where things were going. Coaching staff grew tense under pressure. And the front office? They stayed silent. But the pressure didn't go away. Sanders didn't lash out. He didn't campaign for reps. He kept working, kept leading in practice, kept playing like someone who knew his time would come, not because of politics, but because of persistence. And slowly, the narrative began to shift, not because the organization changed its mind, but because they couldn't deny the difference anymore. Sanders was outperforming expectations. His timing was sharp. His command of the offense was improving. And more importantly, the team responded to him in huddles, in drills, in moments that don't make a highlight reel, but define trust inside a locker room. And Garrett, he noticed every detail. He started showing up with a different energy. Not excitement, validation. His quiet support of Sanders had never been about choosing sides. It was about standing for what was earned. And now, it was finally becoming visible to the people who had ignored it the first time. The reps increased. The confidence returned. And for the first time since the quarterback announcement, the team started feeling like a team again. But the damage was already done. The fracture may have begun to heal, but the scar will stay. Because when a team sees leadership choose optics over substance, it doesn't just create doubt. It creates a disconnect that lingers long after the headlines fade. And Garrett's reaction, though restrained, was a flashing red light. It told everyone, we've seen this movie before, and we're not watching again without saying something. Because Garrett has always held the line. Through every misstep, every rebuild, every year, they promised things were different. He's been the standard, and that's why his frustration carried so much weight. It wasn't emotional, it was earned, and it forced the Browns into a corner. They could either keep pretending the plan was working, or they could finally pivot toward what was clearly right in front of them. A young quarterback stepping into his moment, and a leader in Garrett demanding the organization act like it actually wants to win. This wasn't just about Sanders starting games. It was about the team regaining control of its identity. You can't build anything sustainable if the locker room doesn't believe in the decision-makers. And when Garrett clapped slowly in that meeting room, it wasn't just shade, it was a dare. Show us you're serious. Show us this isn't just another wasted year. Show us you're actually watching the same practices we are. The Browns may never admit it publicly, but Garrett's silent protest forced their hand. Sanders wasn't just handed a role, he earned it. Over time, through consistency, through resilience, and yes, through the quiet support of a veteran who saw through the noise. Now the team is finally starting to align. The locker room is steadier. The energy is coming back. The offense is waking up. And Garrett, he's back to leading with fire, not because the problems are gone, but because for the first time in a while, it feels like the right decisions are being made for the right reasons. But none of this means Cleveland is out of the woods. Because this saga revealed something deeper, a pattern of mismanagement that has defined too much of this team's past. The Sanders situation is just the latest example. The only difference is this time, Garrett had seen enough and chose to push back, not with ultimatums, not with theatrics, just with steady, undeniable leadership, the kind that speaks through presence, the kind that demands change, not through ego, but through principle. And the question now is simple. Will the Browns learn from it? Because Garrett won't say out loud, but he knows what happens when leadership stops listening. He knows how quickly culture can slip. And if this team wants to keep him engaged, keep this locker room unified, and actually build something that lasts, it starts with keeping this momentum alive. They can't go back. Not now. Not after everything this moment exposed. The Browns are on the edge of something. Whether it becomes progress or another missed opportunity depends on whether they finally start listening to the voices that have been right all along. Garrett never wanted to be the story. He just wanted the team to live up to the standard. And thanks to his quiet push and Sanders' unshakable composure, they might finally be on their way. But if Cleveland lets this slip again, if they go back to old habits and start prioritizing narrative over truth, there won't be a slow clap next time. There will be silence. And then there will be consequences. Let us know what you think. Should Sanders take the full reins? Did Garrett's silent protest shift the direction of the franchise? Or are we still waiting for this team to finally get out of its own way? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you're here for the real story behind the headlines. Because we're not just watching the games, we're watching the fallout. And with the Browns, there's always more to come. Here's the hard truth. The Browns didn't just almost derail their quarterback situation. They nearly derailed their culture. Because once a team starts turning its back on earned opportunity, it's not just one player that feels it. The entire locker room feels it. Every single guy who grinds through the week starts wondering if what they're doing actually matters. And that's where fractures begin, not in the headlines, not in the standings, but in the hearts of the people who suit up thinking they're playing for something real. Shedeur Sanders wasn't benched because he didn't perform. He was benched because someone decided his performance wasn't the story they wanted to tell. That's not strategy. That's mismanagement, dressed up as caution. And in a league built on competition, that kind of thinking spreads like rot. Myles Garrett knew that. He didn't make a scene. He didn't need to. His silence did the talking. A silent protest from one of the most respected voices in the league doesn't need a press conference. It just needs to exist. And exist it did. Every time Sanders made another crisp throw in practice, every time he led the scout team like it was a playoff drive, Garrett noticed. Every time the offense stumbled under Gabriel, when a huddle felt lifeless, when the sideline grew tense, Garrett noticed. Not because he was looking to undermine anyone, but because he knew what this team could be if it stopped stepping on itself. And so he waited. He waited through the eye contact players weren't making, through the uncomfortable silences in team meetings, through the coded responses in post-game interviews, through every decision that leaned towards saving face instead of building trust, until, slowly, the tide began to turn. Sanders didn't stop preparing like the starter. He didn't ask for reps. He earned them back, one by one. A red zone package here, a third down conversion there. And with each successful drive, the team's energy shifted. It wasn't just about play execution. It was about validation. The kind of validation that says, we see you, we know it's real, and we're with you. And Garrett? You could see it in him too. The silence started to crack, not with words, but with presence. A quicker jog off the field. A little more fire in pre-game warm-ups. That slight shoulder bump with Sanders after a drive. All of it said the same thing. This is a direction we should have taken from the start. But it's important to understand, this wasn't some fairy tale redemption arc. The damage had been done. The locker room still bore the bruises from that initial call. Trust doesn't come back just because the right guy gets the ball. It comes back when the system starts showing its learning. And the Browns? Well, they're still teetering. Because as much as things have improved, the scars of that decision remain. Garrett doesn't forget. Veterans don't forget. And fans, especially in Cleveland, definitely don't forget. They've seen this franchise take 2 steps forward and 3 steps into the abyss too many times. They watched promising seasons dissolve under the weight of internal confusion and front office tunnel vision. This could have been another one of those seasons. Another chapter in a long book of mismanaged potential. But Garrett refused to let that happen quietly. He may not have stood in front of Mike and called people out, but in every move, every unspoken gesture, he reminded the organization, we've been here before. Don't do it again. The locker room rallied around that message, not just behind Garrett, but behind the idea that performance still matters, that effort is still rewarded, that you don't need to play politics to be seen. And Sanders? He lived up to it. He didn't flinch, didn't let the weight of the decision define him. He kept climbing, methodically, relentlessly. He let his game speak for itself. And when that game finally spoke loud enough, even the most stubborn minds in the building couldn't ignore it anymore. That's what makes the situation so defining, not just for the Browns, but for any team watching. It's a test of values, of leadership, of the difference between being reactive and being accountable. Cleveland still has the chance to choose right. They can build around the energy that Garrett and Sanders have reignited. They can recenter the team on clarity, on performance, on actual merit. But they've also shown how quickly things can spiral when fear leads a conversation. Because make no mistake, that's what the benching of Sanders was. A decision rooted in fear. Fear of headlines. Fear of expectations. Fear of committing to a future before it was safe. And that fear nearly cost them everything. The only reason they're still in position to turn things around is because 2 players, one rising, one established, decided they weren't going to play along. Sanders proved his worth through resilience. Garrett proved his leadership through silence. And together, they forced a franchise that's so often lost in its own drama to listen. But now comes the hard part. Follow through. Because it's easy to let Sanders play once the noise gets too loud. It's harder to own the mistake. To stand in front of the team and say, we got it wrong, and we're making it right. If the Browns want to win back the full trust of their locker room, that's what has to happen next. Not just a new starter, but a new standard. One that doesn't wait for pressure to make the right call. One that acts with conviction. One that doesn't make Garrett have to carry the emotional weight of an entire franchise again. And for once, Cleveland has a roadmap. Let the vets lead. Let the grinders earn their moment. And let the front office take a back seat to the reality happening on the field. This isn't about Gabriel versus Sanders anymore. It never really was. It's about whether Cleveland can finally stop getting in its own way. Garrett has done everything a leader can do without blowing the whole thing up. He stood still when it counted. He let his silence speak. And when Sanders needed quiet validation, Garrett gave it. Not with fanfare, but with intention. And maybe that's the story here. That in a league built on hype, it's the quiet ones who change the course. Sanders never screamed for attention. Garrett never needed to raise his voice. And yet, together, they shifted the energy of a franchise that's been stuck in survival mode for far too long. Now it's up to the people in charge to meet that energy, to stop leading from behind, to stop choosing the convenient over the correct. The Browns have a real shot to build something now, but only if they trust the voices that never asked for the spotlight, yet earned it anyway. And if they don't, if they go back to old habits and quiet the very leaders who saved the season from disaster, there won't be a next time. Garrett won't stay forever. And the next time trust breaks, it won't be patched back up with reps or cryptic tweets. It'll be gone for good. What's unfolding in Cleveland right now is more than just a storyline. It's a statement. And whether the franchise wants to admit it or not, the statement wasn't made by a coach or a GM. It wasn't made in a press conference or on a highlight reel. It was made by Myles Garrett in silence, when he stopped pretending that a bad decision was just part of the plan. That's where this all began. With a moment so subtle it could have been missed by anyone not paying attention. The moment the coaching staff announced Dillon Gabriel as a starter, and Garrett didn't flinch. No applause, no fake smile, just stillness. And in that stillness, volume. Because Garrett has seen this before. He's lived through the moments when a franchise decides to play politics instead of football, and each time, the cost hasn't just been wins, it's been identity. And this time it was personal, because Shedeur Sanders had done everything right. He wasn't just another young QB with a famous last name. He was showing up early, putting in the work, staying late. He was the first guy in the film room, the last guy off the field. Teammates noticed. Coaches noticed. Garrett definitely noticed. And then, the organization made a choice that ignored all of that. When they benched Sanders or Gabriel, they didn't just sideline a quarterback. They sidelined the message that work matters. That's why Garrett's reaction was so sharp, even in silence. Because it wasn't just about one player. It was about what that player represented. Sanders had become a symbol of everything Garrett believes in: effort, focus, leadership without ego. So when he was pushed aside, it was a slap in the face to every player trying to earn it the right way. The result? A team suddenly unsure of itself. The offense stalled. The locker room felt it. The veterans grew cold. Not outwardly defiant, but different, quieter, detached. And Garrett, always a stabilizer, didn't try to cover it up. He let it hang in the air like a dare. Fix this. Meanwhile, Sanders did what professionals do. He kept showing up. No sulking. No whispers to the media. Just clean footwork, crisp reads, and quiet leadership. The kind that doesn't scream for a starting job, but demands one through repetition and reliability. And eventually, the pressure became too much to ignore. Not from fans. Not even from Garrett. From the results. From a very thing the Browns were pretending wasn't happening right in front of them. Sanders was performing, and Gabriel wasn't elevating. It was that simple, That's when the reps started to shift. Slowly, subtly, a few extra throws here. A few more snaps and live drills. The kind of adjustments that are meant to save face while walking back a mistake. But everyone saw it for what it was. A course correction, long overdue. Garrett didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He just re-engaged. That was the sign. He started moving with purpose again. Coaching up younger players. Getting louder on the sidelines. That edge returned. Not because everything was fixed, but because finally it was starting to feel right again. Because this entire thing, from the first silent protest to Sanders earning his way back into conversation, wasn't about ego. It was about alignment. A team can survive a lot. Injuries, tough schedules, even bad luck. But what it can't survive is disconnection between the locker room and the decision-makers. And that's where the Browns have been headed fast. Garrett stood in the gap, not with a speech or a tantrum, but with unwavering body language that said, "We don't believe in this, and we're not going to pretend we do." And now that belief is slowly returning, not because of a press release, but because the guys who've earned the right to lead are finally being heard. That's the shift, and that's the warning. Because if the Browns don't learn from this, if they fall back into old habits, if they once again choose control over chemistry, if they let politics overtake performance one more time, they won't just lose games. They'll lose Garrett. They'll lose the soul of the team. Right now, there's still time. Sanders is rising. Garrett is back to leading with fire. And for the first time in months, the Browns look like a team on the same page. But the memory of what almost happened still lingers. The silence still echoes. So the next move matters. Because this time, if they mess it up again, the silence won't just be a protest. It'll be the sound of the locker room walking away. Let us know. Did Garrett's quiet defiance change everything? Has Sanders reclaimed his shot for good? Or is this just a temporary fix to a deeper, ongoing issue in Cleveland? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and stick with us. Because in this league, the loudest truths are often the ones nobody wants to say out loud. We'll say them anyway.